Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to give it just a few minutes as people start to fall in, and then we'll get started. So just a couple of seconds longer. I see lots of people coming into this webinar. That's awesome. Give it just a couple more seconds here. And then we're going to kick off here. So welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to our webinar. This webinar is going to be pretty interesting. We've got a panel of MSPs and some technology that's really going to talk about an emerging tool for your, what you're doing on your security, and some things that you may not know that is happening, and will help you figure that out. So my name is Tanya Gentry. I'm the Chief Sales Officer for Big Red Media MSP Success Magazine. So thank you guys for coming. And before I introduce the panel, I want to do some quick housekeeping. So for everybody that asked, people always say, is this going to be recorded? Yes, it is. So we will send the recording out to you after. You will have access to that. And we will do Q&A. The Q&A will be at the end. So we want to go through the panel. I've got some questions that I'm specifically going to be asking them. But if there's something that comes up, please feel free, put it in the Q&A. I'll grab it at the end, and we'll make sure that everything gets answered before we get off this webinar. So, all right, let's meet the panel. One of the things I think is funny, you'll see my hair's hiding it, but 2/3 of us, or really I guess 3/4 of us, have some association with Phoenix, whether it's our logo for Big Red Media, or two of the companies in here. So first of all, let's meet Aaron Simonek. Aaron, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Morning, yes. So I'm Aaron Simonek. I'm the owner of Phoenix Technology in Vancouver, Washington. Oftentimes we're kind of questioned about our name because we are an MSP, not in Phoenix, Arizona, but in Vancouver. Then they ask, oh, you mean you're in Canada? No, we're in Vancouver, Washington. Yeah. Our primary vertical is financial services, with also some construction on there. And we've been operating since 1992. That's us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And we have Dan Foote. Dan, tell us a little bit about you.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are.
Yeah, it's afternoon where I'm at.
There you go.
Yeah.
My company is Dan Tech Services. We're based out of Anchorage, Alaska. We are a client-centric MSP with a focus on security, which is one of the big reasons why we're here in this webinar. As an MSP, I've been around for about 15 years. My journey through technology goes back 25 years. So it's great to be here with this panel and this team.
Awesome, thank you. And then Amit Dillon.
Hey, Tanya, good to see you as usual. Yes. So I'm with Phoenix Technologies, the BIOS company, and I've got my colleague Rob Inman that's here as well. You can, of course, see our Phoenix logo. And Aaron will refer to you as MSP Phoenix, if that's all right, just to avoid
confusion. Yes.
Yeah, as you say, I think Dan's the only one that's not Phoenix related. So, really excited to be here today. I'm part of the marketing team here at Phoenix, and we're going to talk about a product called FirmGuard, and really want to let the MSPs talk about it since they're users of the product. But just to sort of give people an idea, so FirmGuard is a product that we designed here at Phoenix Technologies for BIOS management, and we'll get into sort of what all that means. And simply put, FirmGuard is designed to help you remotely secure, configure, and update BIOS. And the benefits of it to an MSP, and again, we'll let Aaron and Dan talk about that in detail, is really there's security and compliance aspect to it. There's also a technician efficiency aspect. So really just not having to go on site, not having to send technicians on site. And then, of course, what every MSP wants to hear is there is a method to be able to increase your MRR, because, again, you're providing security for an area of the stack that I think it's fair to say most MSPs on the call today probably are not protecting. But again, we'll get into that.
Yeah, so, in case somebody has to jump off, I know, I've worked with Phoenix now for a couple of years. One of the things you guys have said to me is, yes, we are that Phoenix. And yes, we are a 40-year-old company that is almost like a startup, right? Because you're now into this other area of it that you've always been part of. But one of the things that you guys have done for our community that I think is awesome is the free SecureCheck audit. Can you throw that up there just in case somebody has to jump off here? This is a free audit that they do. There's no strings attached to it. If you aren't going to be able to stay for the end, or if you're like, hey, I might have to bounce, go ahead, scan this, get this in there. It's something we're going to talk about, this technology, these threats that are out there that you probably don't know that are happening, but this audit can do all of that for you and let you know, what's happening with it. And if you have anything that's an issue with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, Rob's going to go through a demo. So this, will make a lot of sense to you. But yeah, as Tanya says, I really encourage you, go to firmguard.com/TMT, sign up for the audit. It's totally free. You'll get an opportunity to, it's more than just an evaluation of FirmGuard. You can actually take this and deploy it on your client endpoints as well. And you're going to get all kinds of really valuable information that really you can use for prospecting purposes. And again, Aaron and Dan know this very well. They'll talk about how they've been using it.
Perfect. So, Amit, while we're on here, what is BIOS firmware?
Sure. Let me see if I can pull up a slide here, a little visual to help. So yeah, a lot of people have heard the term BIOS. They may not be quite sure what it is. So just to sort of level set everybody. So really simply put, the moment that you hit the on button on your favorite laptop, desktop, whatever it might be, probably the device that you're listening here on the webinar, the very first piece of software that comes up is what we call UEFI BIOS firmware. And it's pre-OS. So essentially what that means is it comes up, it scans the hardware, makes sure everything is sane, and then it's actually the firmware that launches the operating system, Windows, for example. And so that's why it's so crucial, because obviously if you're able to control the firmware, hack it in some way, well, then you can launch any kind of operating system that you want. And clearly that's a situation you don't want any of your clients to be in. So again, simply put, first piece of software that comes up. I will mention one thing here. People refer to this as BIOS, and you see I have this term up here on the slide, UEFI. Don't worry about what that is. Just know that that is the modern standard for BIOS. So, and when I say modern, it's really over the last 20 years or so. So you'll hear me use the term UEFI, BIOS, firmware. They're all sort of interchangeable. And one thing that I want to mention, we talked about the SecureCheck audit. One of the things that FirmGuard can do or will do is tell you if you've got endpoints that are not using the modern standard, that are not using UEFI. And you'd be actually surprised at the percentage of endpoints that we found through these audits, which, Tanya, we've been doing for 6 or 8 months now. It's about 10%. So roughly 10% of the endpoints that have gone through this audit have actually not used the modern standard, and they're extremely vulnerable. And that's just one piece of really interesting data that you can gather by doing these SecureCheck audits.
So if I have 100 endpoints, that means 10 of them probably have some type of a security
very good chance. Yeah, right? That's certainly what we've seen. Yeah, it's certainly going to be more than 0. Up to about 10%. And again, Dan and Aaron will get into that. They noticed that with their own endpoints.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. For Dan and Aaron, I'll start with you. But what are some of the biggest challenges that you had in terms of managing, monitoring, and protecting BIOS firmware?
Yeah, the BIOS firmware as a whole was an unknown threat for a lot of our clients and for ourselves. If we're going to deploy a machine for a financial client, we'll go through the firmware, make sure we have the right settings, and then we pass it off to them, and it's in the field. If that client should deploy a firmware update, if they should change something in there, that's an unknown quantity to us at that point. We aren't told about changes. We aren't told about logging into the firmware. If there's a password on it, we're not told anything. It's just kind of the Wild West of computers. And so now with FirmGuard, we get alert. We can see when things are changing. We get notified clearly within the application. It really has put a spotlight on a much needed area of the computer.
So you probably, I mean, up until this, you weren't able to really monitor it very well, right?
Correct. If we ever had a situation where we're trying to troubleshoot a problem, and one of the steps that we would take was modify something in the BIOS. Well, that means we have to go on site. We have to travel there. We have to figure out where it is within the menu system and make that change. And then, heaven forbid, they have a password that we put on it years ago on that firmware. Where's that password? We have ways to handle that, but it's really difficult. So firmware with the remote capability has really made that into a feature that I can now charge for my clients. We're performing cybersecurity hygiene at the BIOS level.
Dan, anything to add to that, or how you guys are doing it, or how you were doing it?
How we were doing it usually relied on individual machine touches and checking for BIOS upgrades there. It's always been a challenge to manage something that requires that individual care and attention, and quite often only allowed you to maybe update the BIOS, but do nothing else remote to that system. So you had the benefit of making sure that you were running the latest BIOS, but you didn't have the benefit of what FirmGuard does, which is allow us to make settings changes remote when we're working with Dell, HP, or Lenovo type computers. So it's been a real benefit for a lot of reasons. One of the others is that we can pretty much set wake on LAN for any machine, regardless of who the manufacturer is, which is also a huge benefit for a company that does most of their work remote.
Very cool. Meet, you were talking about that stat was 10% legacy BIOS mode, right?
Right.
I think that's probably, what Aaron and Dan were just talking about. I want to make sure, and I know everybody on here will want to hear. I think you guys had found, from all of these audits that you guys have been doing, there's actually a couple more stats that you had on there. If you want to talk about it, and then we can go into some more, more issues.
No, happy to. And again, when Rob goes to the demo at the end, you'll see right on our dashboard, we get these stats. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So we've been doing these SecureCheck audits for quite a while, and over the many thousands of endpoints. I mentioned that roughly 10% are in legacy BIOS mode. Again, that means they're old, just need to be replaced. Another very interesting stat is we found, and this is actually very surprising to me, that only about 30% of endpoints actually had BitLocker enabled. Which then means 70% were not enabled. In fact, we had many MSPs who almost didn't believe us. They're like, really? That little? And like, yeah, the data is right there. That's one that I think, and I've had many MSPs tell me this, that's a piece of data that's very hard to come by, across your entire set very easily. You have to do scripts and so forth to get that info. But Rob will show it right in the dashboard of FirmGuard. And then the last one is roughly 16%, 16% of the endpoints that we had in the SecureCheck audit did not have secure boot enabled. And again, without getting into too much detail, secure boot is a mechanism that Microsoft implemented to make sure that the BIOS can only launch an authenticated version of the operating system. In other words, that you can't launch a rogue operating system. And so if 16% of the endpoints have it disabled, that means on those 16%, you can potentially launch a rogue operating system. And in fact, that, if we talk about BIOS malware, that's a key vector that those who inject BIOS malware try and do, is essentially disable secure boot so that then they can launch a rogue operating system and then take over the endpoint.
lot of scary stuff. So Aaron, I know you talked a little bit about like why you've got, you know, FirmGuard, but what was the main driver that motivated you to adopt FirmGuard?
To put knowledge where I didn't know where I had a threat before. So, you know, I said before, it's kind of the Wild West of the computer. You don't know what the settings are. You don't know what's been changed. You don't know anything that's happening on that level. So with FirmGuard, you know, we can see the modifications. We can see that there's an update waiting to happen. We can see the breadcrumb of who did what on the BIOS level. The reporting capability that we can now produce just helps us maintain the security and integrity of that endpoint.
And Aaron, I remember you and I had a conversation. You have a lot of financial services and wealth management customers, right?
Right.
And I remember you were telling me that they're, you know, as you would expect, very security conscious, and you know they get audits very regularly. And you were telling me that the reporting aspect of SecureCheck, in other words, knowing that you're protecting the BIOS, is something that the auditors started to pay attention to. And do you see that sort of becoming maybe a regular part of audits for your clients going forward?
I do. I think it's going to increase over time. I think more auditors who are becoming more aware of the BIOS part of the machine are going to be asking about that. And now we have the ability to log those that information. So it's available to us whenever we need to produce it.
Yeah, and that's very consistent. And we've seen that across our customer set, particularly those that deal with healthcare or financial services and so forth. Auditors, I think, are starting to realize that, wait a minute, here's an area that's been unprotected. So from a compliance perspective, we have to report on it.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we know compliance is going to get easier, right? So we know there's a lot of things coming down the pike in the next couple of years. So, you know, Dan, you're relatively new to Phoenix, right? And how did you
really new?
Really new, yeah.
Really new. Yeah.
What time is it now?
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, and I know we were talking, and you had it was interesting, and I think it's relevant here. First of all, what made you, I think you said it was a cold email that you got, but what made you go, okay, I want to think about this. I need to find out more about it. And then how did you roll it out?
Well, as I'm sure every MSP that's watching this is aware, we get inundated with every trick in the sun to try to get us to click on their links or whatever. FirmGuard came across with one. I knew the company. I knew Phoenix was a company that it's been around for like forever, and that lended credibility to my vision of what it helps me assess a product. And FirmGuard also told me that I could do, as Aaron just mentioned, take better control of what's happening at the BIOS level of a machine, so that we have the ability to better control the security of our clients. And as I said, we are security focused, always have been, always will be. Without that, you know, I might as well just fold up the tent. So their hook was really quite simple. Take better control of what you've got out in the fleet, and we can help. And so it was worth it to me to do the demo, take a look at the product. Couple things I would love to see happen is an advance on the breadth of machines that the manufacturers that they cover. But I think that those things come in time, especially for basically what's a pretty much a startup company. And I've watched a lot of startups move forward, but FirmGuard has Phoenix behind them. So it's more than just a startup. And what did it take for us to roll it out?
Yeah.
Well, we rolled it out internally first, and this was the middle of last month in October. We rolled it out internally. We tested it for the first week, and then had another conference with FirmGuard, and we ended up rolling it out within about a 3-week span. but because we did most of the rollouts on weekends, in about a 3-week span, we had virtually all of our clients covered. So
You and I were, Dan, I remember you and I were chatting about this, and I think I remember you said like October 18th, I think is when you got the cold email. You immediately jumped on it. So that's what, not even hardly a month ago, right? Or the 21st. And then I think you did a demo, and then you did internal evaluation on your machines for about a week. And then you rolled it out to like 200 plus of your clients, right? In a couple of weekends.
that's pretty accurate there, Amit. We had it rolled out. I think when I look at the board now, the dates that I see coming up are like November 4th and such for a lot of the first check-in times. So I've been very pleased with how graceful it was to roll out. We used our RMM tools to get it out using the PowerShell script. Very quiet install. Didn't require a reboot unless you go in and make BIOS settings changes. That's where you might want to be a little judicious and cautious about exactly what you do. Don't give your clients that kind of surprise.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, Amit, will you go into a little bit, or at least introduce us to FirmGuard? I know we're going to go through a demo and that stuff, and I know we've got lots more questions for the panel, but we are getting some questions in the chat, and I want to make sure that we address that really quickly, and then we will go to everybody's question when we get done with this for sure.
Sure. Yeah. And again, Rob's going to go through these, but I thought I would just sort of prep it and give everybody a sense. So, the product's of course called FirmGuard, and it's got a variety of different features. They all begin with the word secure. So SecureCheck, SecureConfig, SecureUpdate, and so forth. So if you hear me, mention something like that, I'm talking about a FirmGuard feature. And so, we've talked a little bit about SecureCheck, and that's for BIOS firmware security. And Aaron, you mentioned that that was sort of the thing off the bat for your financial services customers, as we talked about, that they sort of glommed onto. And I think you're going to talk about this later, but you guys are going to start to roll this into your standard security package. And obviously uplift for additional MRR with that. So that's sort of the base capability, if you want, the security capability. But the product goes well beyond that. So I had mentioned technician efficiency. So SecureConfig. So this is the ability to remotely configure your BIOS. So no longer having to go into and press various function keys and go through an individual menu. And Dan, I believe you mentioned that this was one of the things that caught your attention specifically. I believe it was with Wake on LAN. Is that right?
Yes, the ability to make sure that we can trigger a machine to return to an on state. And in a lot of cases, modern firmware allows you to not only wake up an Ethernet port, but also a wireless card, which is to me invaluable because so many things are going wireless.
Right. Okay. And so that's just, one example of something that you could, you can set remotely. Basically anything that you can do from the endpoint via SecureConfig, you can do remotely now. And then there's SecureUpdate, which I think the name probably gives it away. That's the ability to do a remote BIOS update. And I believe, Aaron, you were mentioning to me when we were chatting before that even without doing an update, that you found this to be really helpful when you were troubleshooting. Can you relay some of that discussion we had before?
Yeah. If I'm working on a machine or have a tech working on a machine and they're trying to troubleshoot an issue that is just out of the blue weird, it's not an everyday kind of problem, then we just drill down deeper and deeper and deeper until finally we're at the BIOS level. What in the BIOS could be causing this particular problem? So one way is, we could go through the navigation steps of going online and finding the manufacturer, finding the product manual, finding the revision, all that different stuff. And we can read the change notes, what happened, what changed, whatever. Or we can go into FirmGuard. We can see what current level of firmware is on that computer. And it'll say it's old, it's new, it's current, or whatever. And we can say, let's just do an update. Let's update that firmware. And then boom, that troubleshooting step of trying to figure out what's old and what's new, what could possibly be a problem is thereby eliminated through the FirmGuard features.
Yeah, I guess simply put, like you can just take one variable out of the equation real simply, just from the dashboard. So that's SecureUpdate. Then there's SecureWipe. which again, this is the ability to emphasizing remotely wipe an endpoint drive. And when I say wipe, I don't mean like a Windows reset. This is a forensic wipe, bit by bit wipe. And Aaron, I know that's one that you that your face kind of lit up. I remember when we first talked about that some time ago, because you've got kind of a convoluted way that you do that right now, I believe, with your clients, right?
I do have a process in place for a remote wipe. We use that feature whenever an employee who lives in a different state is removed from the company. So we get notified by the client that that employee is terminated, and then during that termination phone call, we remote in and make the machine inoperable. So our previous steps were using a program that's not really meant to do that, but through Hodgepodge, it can be done. And then we get the machine back, we unhodgepodge it and make it active again. Or what we do is we get the machine back and we disable it, this mechanism this way. It's probably our favorite, but not always practical.
Yeah.
Now with FirmGuard. What?
Yeah, one key thing about SecureWipe is you don't have to destroy the machine or destroy the hard drive. You can actually reuse it. In fact, that's a common use case that we hear is we have, an MSP that's got a client that says, hey, they want to donate some old endpoints to a local library or something, but they want to make sure that's totally wiped. So and another use for SecureWipe also is, as you were pointing out, Aaron, if a machine is stolen, or you make sure that a disgruntled employee doesn't have access anymore.
If it's stolen, we push the button, we get notified that that drive has been erased, we get a certificate for it, we get the audit trail, and we can prove to the client that that data is no longer in play. And they're happy, we're happy, we go on the next ticket.
Right. So that's SecureWipe, and then SecureSense. This provides you, a variety of different sort of endpoint information. We talked about the legacy BIOS mode, so that the non-UEFI or the non-modern standard, roughly 10% of endpoints, that is displayed via this feature called SecureSense. And then finally SecureB, which is really just a secure monitoring capability. So again, Rob's going to go through all these features in detail, but I wanted to make sure everybody kind of understood it and really, hear how it's being used by the MSPs here.
Perfect. Great. So back to the panelists here, how do you charge for, or how do you plan to charge your clients for FirmGuard? And Dan, do you want to start with that? I know this is relatively new for you, right? So how are you charging them?
So given the price point of this product, we are, especially for our long-term clients, we are just rolling it into their stack. We're absorbing the cost. We can make up for that cost later. I'm not too terribly concerned about that, because the value is there, and wanting to make sure that security is a focus of ours means that there are things that sometimes you just, basically bite the bullet. You don't go and ask for permission first. You just take care of things. And that's what we do. We are the #1 source for our clients when it comes to technology and support, and they rely on us. And that kind of working relationship is truly appreciated, so that we can make sure that we can roll out products like this that help protect them. And we have done a very good job over 15 years as an MSP of taking care of our clients.
And I know a lot of people are probably thinking, well, okay, what is the price point? So let's just go ahead and mention it. And
I think it's great.
This is what Dan's paying. So it's $2 per endpoint per month. So simple pricing, $2 per endpoint per month. That's the price that Dan's paying, and he became a paying customer. I think it was about 10 days ago, Dan, if I'm not mistaken. But very simple model, and you get every feature. So those features that I talked about earlier, SecureWipe, SecureConfig, and so forth, you get all of them for that $2 price. It's not a la carte, so you get the whole thing.
Aaron, are you doing anything different?
No, it's very similar. Every year we do our package updates, and in 2025, we're just going to have this as part of our line item as what we offer for cybersecurity. It is included. We just upped the price to coincide with our annual update. And they just have it. There's no
Great.
option.
Yeah. That I think that's great. You know, I work with a lot of vendors, and we do a lot of things, obviously, with inside the MSP community. And many times an MSP goes, okay, I need to figure out more. How do I do this? What do I need to you know, get myself educated on before I start to implement anything new, or, you know, anything along those lines? Can you talk about, is there any special knowledge that you guys feel like a regular MSP would need to have in order to, you know, use FirmGuard, to put that and deploy it?
I'll jump in on this one.
Yeah.
And I think Aaron referenced this in our first meeting, was that, wow, I learned a lot here. You know, you really, you know what the BIOS is there for, you know why it's there, you know how to go in and do certain things. This gives you a whole different view on the capabilities of the controls that you have over a machine, and being able to do it remote is just, you know, it's just an incredible piece of technology advancement for us. So that's learning more about BIOS infrastructure and the capabilities was a big step for us.
I think
And we're looking at every day.
Yeah, you were telling me that you know, I guess basic use of the product wasn't very difficult, but I guess you became a little fascinated. I'll use that word, with sort of understanding more and more about the BIOS, and I think you were hoping that that we at Phoenix would have some advanced classes and stuff that perhaps you could take over time.
But I think everything comes in good time, Amit, and I think some of the advancement and features that I kind of expect you guys to move forward with will be a really good thing. So I think that's also the benefit of working with a company that's been around for 40 years.
I really like pop-up bubbles for info. You can hover on the question mark and it will display the simple text of what that item is. That's appreciated very much.
All right, Rob, we got to take that back to the engineering team. Pop-up bubbles.
Yeah. Well, and I think it speaks to it, right? So, you know, what I'm hearing is that you're saying, hey, you don't need to have any special knowledge in order to do this, but what it does give you is more knowledge, right? So when you are talking to your clients and you're going through, whether it's your QBRs or anything, you can speak now, you know, to even another part of security that you're offering to them. That, you know, and for anybody on here, if you're not doing it and you're, you know, an MSP that's in your area is doing it, they'll be talking about that. So keep that in mind too. Aaron, in your own words, why do you think an MSP should use FirmGuard?
It gives it completes your bubble of influence on that machine, or your control. Whereas before you're just doing half of it. You know, the underlying foundation of the machine is now available to you without having to be in front of it.
Dan, anything to add to that?
I think being able to have a product like this adds to your security stack. And if you're not paying attention to compliance, if you're not paying attention to security, then you're probably not in this webinar. So to all of you that are here and listening to this, my hat's off to you for taking that step, because I think it means that you're serious about your clients and your systems and protecting them. As was pointed out earlier, audits are becoming increasingly more common. And when it comes to what's happening in the compliance industries and what's happening in the insurance industries towards compliance, the drivers are there. You have to have control of the full machine from boot up to shut down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, I want to make sure that we look at it. So Amit, I'm going to turn this over. Look, can you guys do a quick demo? And then we're getting lots of questions. So I want to make sure that we get all those answered. So I want to save some time at the end for some Q&A, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Amit, to start a demo.
Okay. Yeah, I'll actually, I was looking at one of the questions. I'll answer a couple if that's all
Oh
right.
yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So there was a question, is FirmGuard BIOS agnostic? And the answer to that is yes. So it doesn't matter. I know, Phoenix is a company that develops BIOS, but it's not limited to ours. It doesn't matter. And it's also across a heterogeneous set of endpoints. It doesn't matter if it's HP, Dell, Lenovo. I think, Dan, you use a lot of MSI machines. So the manufacturer and the BIOS don't matter. And there was another question, is there a minimum amount of endpoints required? And the answer to that is yes, it's 100 minimum. And then we'll get to some of the other questions afterward. But yeah, let's without further ado, let's kind of get into the demo here in a moment with Rob. Just want to emphasize the SecureCheck audit. If you haven't already gone to firmguard.com/TMT, please look at that, sign up. Absolutely no charge for that. I had mentioned the price, but just to give everybody a sense, $2 in that 100 endpoint minimum that I just mentioned. And obviously, as you scale up, the price goes down from a volume perspective. So with that, let me hand it over to my colleague Rob Inman, who's our director of product, and he'll walk you through the actual product itself.
All right, thanks, Amit. Let me get my screen share going. All right, so hello everyone, great to be here with you guys. Like I mentioned, my name is Rob Inman. I'm the director of product. And what we're going to go over today is a little bit of the main features that are in FirmGuard today. Hopefully I'll be able to answer some of the questions as I go along. But like Tanya said, we'll have some time at the end also for some question and answer. So we'll start here, which is our dashboard. So as you can see, one of my favorite widgets, most important one here for me, is the endpoint health widget. So this is what tells you things that kind of need your attention within your environment. So starting here at the top, we have how many machines do you have where Secure Boot has been disabled? Then we also show how many have BitLocker disabled, how many have legacy boot enabled, and then at the bottom here, how many firmware drivers are out of date. And I'm going to kind of be going through them. I'll skip BitLocker because that's pretty obvious. I don't think I need to spend my time explaining that to this group. So let's start here at Secure Boot being disabled. Like Amit mentioned, Secure Boot is something that you want to make sure is enabled because the OS is, the BIOS is checking that the OS is booting as expected and that there's nothing kind of hiding behind the OS. And, like the slide that Amit showed, that's where if a bad actor is going to hide behind the OS, that's where it's going to happen. And Secure Boot was invented to prevent that from happening. So, and as he mentioned, we have like 16% of the machines that we have installed on that they actually have Secure Boot disabled. Now, to fix the issue, you actually have to get into the BIOS and modify that to enable Secure Boot. And as Aaron and Dan mentioned, in the past, you actually had to have hands-on to the machine in order to make those changes. So it wasn't an easy thing to do. If the machine was already on location, you would have to dispatch a technician on site, and they would have to go on there and reboot the machine, figure out what the proper key is to get into the BIOS. I know I missed my prompt time various times to get into the BIOS, make that change, and then reboot the machine again. So let's fix this issue. So we have Secure Boot disabled. We'll click on it. Gives me my list of machines where Secure Boot has been disabled. So if I hop into one, I have this alert in SecureCheck. So the SecureCheck is telling me that Secure Boot appears to be disabled. So I'm going to go into my configuration. And this is where now I have access to all the BIOS settings within this machine. So as you can see, these are all the different configuration settings within the BIOS, and I have access to them remotely from the portal. So I have Secure Boot right here, and this is where I have my checkbox of whether Secure Boot has been enabled or disabled. So this is where I would make the change, and then from here, I could click on Save. Now, once I make a change at the BIOS level, the machine does need to reboot in order to enable that setting. So you have a couple different options to do that. The first one is to reboot it immediately. So if you feel that that change is important enough that you want to interrupt the user and reboot the machine, of course, you can do that immediately, or you can schedule that out as well. So if I wanted to say, reboot it after hours at 6:30 p.m. After the user's already finished their workday, I can do that as well. So we're not interrupting that user and the machine will reboot at that time. So this is, again, the area of secure boot where now I can make that change, save it. Now the machine reboots. When it comes back online, that secure boot is going to be enabled, and you're going to be protected from, again, making sure that the BIOS is checking, that the OS is booting as intended. Now, so this is a security thing, right? And that's one of the great things about FirmGuard is that you can start going down that security list and making sure that you're not just protecting the user in the OS, which pretty much every MSP does, but from the minute that that power button gets pressed off, you can set those settings. Let me go back up here to my endpoints and go into a Dell machine as an example. So I'm going to go here into my settings of the Dell. And, you know, it was mentioned, hey, we want to make sure Wake on LAN is turned on. So I can do a search here for Wake. It expands all the areas where it finds that word. This is Wake on Dock, not what I'm looking for, but right down here is Wake on LAN. So here I can come over and change that setting in the same way, go back up and save that, reboot the machine, and now Wake on LAN is turned on. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples that some partners actually shared with me that I thought, you know, wow, that's actually, yeah, that's pretty nice that you're able to take care of this thing. The second example has to do with actually a BitLocker install. So a lot of times you'll take over an account, right? So you never actually set up the computers. They were working with another MSP and they happen to switch over to your MSP. So now you are managing their computers, but someone else set them up. So one partner was telling me that they were deploying BitLocker using their RMM across all the computers. At the end of that process, they got some error messages that a couple of the machines weren't able to install BitLocker because it didn't have the configuration correctly of the TPM chip in the BIOS. So we can again do a search for TPM. We see here TPM, this machine supports TPM 2.0, but it happens to be turned off. So this partner was telling me that they were able to go into FirmGuard and jump into those machines remotely, turn those settings on, reboot the machines, and then continue their BitLocker installation on those machines. Whereas previously, for something like this, they would have had to stop that, put in a ticket to have a technician go on site. That technician would then have to go into each machine physically, change that setting. Then once that ticket was closed, they could continue that BitLocker installation. I'm going to take a little aside because it's a question that I get frequently, so hopefully I'll get ahead of it, unless someone's already asking and I just haven't seen it. A lot of times I get a question about templates or profiles. You know, hey, Rob, can I just turn TPM on for everything and just push it out there? And quite frankly, the answer today is no. But I do want to explain why. So actually, let me do the example of Wake on LAN that I had before. Let's go take a look at my options Wake on LAN. So you see here, this Dell happens to have LAN only and LAN with PXE boot. These are my options. Now I have seen other machines with Wake on LAN where they actually have a checkbox that it's turned off or on. Let's pop back over here to my endpoints. I actually want to go into a different Dell. Let's go into this Dell and do the same thing. Let's go take a look at Wake on LAN here. So here's Wake on LAN. And now these are my settings for this Dell. Now we're still in Dell, but I have different settings for Wake on LAN. So what I'm trying to explain is that every different machine has a different setting possibly for these Wake on LAN, whether it's TPM. Some machines don't even call it TPM. So it makes it more difficult for us to be able to set a template and therefore push it out to everyone because we're not sure what that machine is going to understand, what options they will have. Now, that's not to say that my team isn't working on it. We have some ideas and we're trying to get to that, but I just like to explain it's not as easy a problem as it would normally be, like just deploying a template within Windows or a profile within Windows, because we're dealing with so many different variables. So like I said, it's a question that I get frequently, so I'd just rather jump ahead of it in case anyone had that question in their mind and hopefully answer it. Now, one last thing that I like to show is I actually come from the MSP world, and you know I've had to, well, let's say, break into my share of machines, whether it's because of a forgotten password or anything like that. So I actually, you know, on my keychain, I had a USB stick that had Linux on it with a bunch of tools that I could use to help me get into a machine and, you know, reset passwords, things like that. So that's definitely a loophole, right? Being able to anyone get into a machine if you know how. So having access into the BIOS gives you the ability to now close some of those loopholes that are available from the BIOS level. So you're bypassing all the security that happens at the Windows, which I'm sure you have secured immensely. You know, you have a password to log in, you have your security software installed on there. So here I can do something like USB boot support. I can disable USB boot support if I choose to in order to kind of close down that loophole. So now I can't put an external drive and boot from an external drive onto this machine. You know, there are other settings on here that you can go through. And I think it was even mentioned that now that you have access to this, our partners are going through and they're finding things that they can now change. And they didn't realize that they could do it. The reason is because the BIOS was always something that was a little bit out of reach. You know, it was at the computer level, you had to have physical access to it. So it wasn't worth the effort to actually have to go learn what one BIOS had versus another BIOS, and then have to physically have access to the machine to change these things. But now that you have remote access to it, it's a lot easier to go in there, even if you're going, you know, from one machine to the next. The way I like to look at it is previously, before FirmGuard, you actually had to touch every machine. So if you had to change 10, 20 machines, you'd actually have to go in there and touch those 10 or 20 machines, reboot them, change the setting, reboot again. Now here, what I'm doing is I can jump from one machine to the next and change the settings, schedule a reboot if needed, so I don't interrupt it, do an immediate reboot if I feel that it's that urgent, but I can do it kind of in a quick succession instead of having to deploy a technician on site. So even if we're not at the point where we can deploy templates out to various machines, it's still a huge step forward to be able to do it remotely. All right, so that that covers a little bit about, you know, the actual editing of the BIOS, being able to configure it, and secure boot being disabled. The next one I want to touch on is the legacy boot. Now, legacy boot is something that the way the OS is installed in legacy mode was really made for machines that didn't have the modern hardware, security hardware necessary to install a secure OS on the machine. And if we were to look at this machine on an RMM, you would see that it's running Windows 10. And that would not raise any red flags, at least not to me. You know, I would look at this and say, hey, it's Windows 10. It's not like it's running, you know, Windows XP or something like that. So it would just kind of fly under the radar. But the fact that I'm flagging it here in FirmGuard, that it is installed in legacy mode, now I have to ask myself why. Yes, there's a small chance that the OS was installed incorrectly, in which case I would want to fix that. But most probably the hardware of the machine doesn't support the modern security requirements of a modern OS. So this is where you can now open up the conversation with your customers and start saying, listen, I have these group of machines that have the OS installed in legacy mode. Let's start looking at how we can phase those machines out. Let's put it in a future budget so it doesn't get your customers by surprise, doesn't get your clients by surprise. I know clients hate that. So now you can kind of plan on removing those systems off and getting them replaced by something that's more modern. The last one that I want to touch on here that's on my dashboard is the firmware driver out of date. So here I see 3 machines. I'll just, let's say, jump into this one. As you can see, I have this alert that it is behind the latest known version. And what I'm seeing is that it's detecting version 15.63 installed on the machine, and the latest known version is 15.66. Now, you will see that there's a crucial thing that's missing here, which is, great, Rob, now you're showing me this. What's the next step? How do I fix this? How do I update the BIOS? So that is a part of Secure Update that's actually getting released in a couple of weeks. This is our latest feature that we came out with in FirmGuard, and we had what we call the detection piece available about a month ago. And we decided, you know what, let's put the detection piece out, let our customers at least see when the BIOS is out of date, and then they can make a decision based off of that. But starting next week or in 2 weeks, you'll have the ability to push the BIOS update out from this dashboard out to the machine. Now, I know that when we're dealing with firmware, there's a little trepidation, of course, because it is crucial to the machine itself. And doing a BIOS update sometimes is a little nerve-wracking. Now, the method that we're using, we are not actually updating the BIOS ourselves. We're just the facilitator of that. So it's a capsule update. So the update is actually being done in the way that the manufacturer does their update. So we do have a warning message that says that the machine will reboot and possibly reboot various times. Do not turn off the machine. But at that point, we kind of hand off the process to the manufacturer's update process. So depending on the different manufacturers, they'll have their own different sets of, whether it reboots twice, 3 times, 4 times, they have their own ways of doing it. And we're just giving you the information, offering you the ability to update it. And then we kind of hand it off to the update process that the manufacturers have. The other feature that I wanted to touch on was SecureWipe that Amit mentioned. So SecureWipe primarily is a feature that maintains compliance. And the easiest example I can give is a doctor's office, right? Doctors, of course, want to maintain HIPAA compliance. They have computers in their office. And at some point, those computers are going to get old and they're going to need to be replaced. So at that point, you need to, in the past, either ship the computer back to your office so you can then remove the hard drive, and Aaron showed, destroy it in some way, or have a technician go on site and remove the hard drive on location, bring all the hard drives back into the office, and again, destroy it at that point. What this offers you is a way to do that process remotely. And I'm just going to walk through it real quick. So as you can see, this machine has a drive on it, so I can select it, I can click wipe drive, and now I have my options of how I want to wipe this drive. Now, because this is coming from the firmware level, these first 4 methods are actually hardware methods of wiping the drive, and they may vary based on the hard drive. So whether you have an SSD or an NVMe or even a platter drive, you'll see different methods available here. We do have software also. So you see like the DoD method of wiping a drive. We have some international methods as well, Canadian, German, British. But this is where you're going to want to select the proper method that is going to maintain that compliance for your client. So once you click erase, of course, you're going to get a message that all the data is going to be gone. And you should know that by clicking wipe drive, but we just want to make sure you're aware. So once you start this process and the process goes through, what you'll have is this certificate of erasure available to you. And now this is what an auditor is going to want to see. So this certificate of erasure tells you that this hard drive with this serial number on this date and time was erased using this method. So if an auditor ever asks, hey, these 5 machines, the doctor, got rid of them, what happened to the data on them? Are we sure that the doctor's office is still HIPAA compliant? You will have these certificate of erasures to show, yes, the data was wiped securely and that doctor is still HIPAA compliant because of this certificate of erasure. Now, because you didn't destroy the drive, but you did wipe all the data off it, now that doctor's office can possibly donate the machines for a tax write-off, I don't know, take it home for their kids to do homework with. The point is that they still have a machine that's available that they can then pass on and reuse outside of their office if need be. So that is what SecureWipe allows you to do. And yeah, so those are basically the main points of the features that you can do with FirmGuard. And of course, the main point being here is that you're working with all of this remotely. So you're not having to deploy someone on site. One last thing that I will mention, just because I did see this question go on, so yes, as Amit mentioned, we don't only work on Phoenix BIOSes. Let me just pop into my endpoints real quick. So for example, you'll see this Dell that shows that the advanced features are enabled on this particular machine. The advanced features are all of the BIOS settings. So as I'm sure most of you are well aware, firmware, it can be very tricky, right? And we want to make sure that our software doesn't do anything that could lead to, machine not booting or something like that. So because of that, what we do is we test the machines in order to make sure that the BIOS is working the way it's supposed to work. UEFI is supposed to be a standard, but you'd be amazed how many manufacturers deviate from that and decide to put their own spin on it. And if we send a command and for whatever reason it's misinterpreted or something like that, there's a possibility that something bad would happen. And we don't want that to happen. So what we do is we go with an allow list format. So we test machines, and once they pass our scrutiny, we put them on the allow list, and that way now they're available to work with. So currently that allow list includes Dells, HPs, and Lenovo's. Now we're working, obviously, as time goes by, to look at more of the machines, increase that number of machines that this works on. Now, Dells, HPs, and Lenovo's make up about 65% of the hardware base that's installed. But again, we're doing this because we'd rather err on the side of safety than just put it out there and hope it works. So that's why we work with that. But as time goes by, you'll see those machine types increase. But today, currently, we do work on Dells, HPs, and Lenovo's as far as all the features that you've seen here today. And with that, I'll hand it back to Tanya and Amit to answer any questions.
All right, fantastic, Rob. Yeah, I think we've got about 5 minutes, Tanya.
Yeah.
I see some questions coming in, so let's.
Yeah, let's go through them. I do want to make sure, I know we're coming to the end. If you'll put that the free scan back up, I want to make sure everybody has access to take advantage of that. That's something that they do for our clients, so I want to make sure we do that. But yes, we've got lots of questions in here. So so you're saying that you facilitate the firmware update process according to the manufacturer's processes. Does that mean the process legally goes back to the manufacturer's EULAS?
You want to answer that one, Rob?
So, we do have, again, the warning that appears from our end, just to make sure that you're aware the process that is happening. But like I said, yes, after that, that capsule update goes to whatever the manufacturer has in place for the update. If that includes showing their EULAs, then yes, that process will include that.
So that's how you say it, is EULAs.
EULA, yeah. That's right.
You can tell the difference between technical people and non-technical people. Yeah,
there's too many of these acronyms: EULA, UFI, UFI.
Yeah. So I'm also going to launch a poll right now while we're answering these. I'm going to go ahead and get that out there so everybody can answer that for us. We would love it.
Hey, Tanya, I saw one simple one. It asked where FirmGuard lives. So the answer is in AWS, Amazon Web Services.
Okay, perfect.
It's a cloud-based product. So
yeah. Is the portal tenant-based segregated by customer?
Yes. And I could have shown that, and I apologize. So yes, we have what's called groups. So you can create your different customer groups. Very soon, we're also going to have some integrations with some of the bigger PSAs and RMMs. So you'll just be able to import the companies and sites from those devices to create the groups automatically. But right now, yes, you can create groups and put endpoints under groups. In fact, if you'll let me, Amit, I think if I could show real quick,
why don't we do that?
It'd be better.
Let's do that. Let me stop sharing here. Go ahead, take it over.
Thank you, appreciate that. So let me go back.
You're probably going to show we have different roles and permissions as well that you.
That's what I was going to go into. So here's the groups. We have a couple created for our demo tenant. We have subgroups available also underneath. And here in our resources section, where we can have the groups, we have install codes for each group. And that can tie into a script, which you would use in your RMM. So you'll see down here, the install code is actually already included in this particular script because I pulled it from this group. So this is how you would push out the agent using your RMM, and then that group code would then make sure that that endpoint reports underneath the group that you're asking it to report to. And then, of course, we have different roles available for the users that you create. You can create an unlimited number of users, so you can have various people that are administrating your tenants, but you can also go in if you have like sub-administrators, like for example, if there is a technician on site and you want them to only be able to see the computers from that site. You can come down here and basically give them access to only that group. And in fact, you can select individual endpoints that you give them access to as well.
Yeah, the other thing we should mention is we have, it doesn't happen often, but there occasionally you have an MSP that's got a bunch of clients and maybe they've got a larger client that has a local IT administrator. You can actually give one of your clients
That's what I was
access
just
to their
explaining to
own.
me.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry for stealing your thunder there, Rob.
Yeah.
No, that's what I was just saying here, where you can actually give them access to an individual group or an endpoint
Right.
to any particular user that you have.
All right.
One question I said we would answer. We have a couple Canadians on here. What's the pricing? Do you have a different pricing for the Canadian dollar?
I actually saw that one. I don't know how to answer that other than whatever the exchange rate is, Rob. I don't know if you have a better answer.
Don't have the exchange rate handy. I could talk to my sales director and ask them. I know there's a figure that they have, but if you take the current exchange rate, it's pretty close to that right now.
Yeah, I'd say reach out to us, and yeah, I think the short answer is there's no uplift. It's just whatever the exchange rate would be.
Correct.
Perfect. I'm just going in order, guys. So we'll stay on here for as long as anyone else can. If USB boot support is disabled, what options do you have if you need to boot from USB, like fixing the corrupt OS?
So at that point, then, yeah, you'd have to physically access the BIOS from the machine, turn USB boot support back on, and then you would go that route.
Okay. Sometimes when you make BIOS changes, the machine won't boot. How is that handled?
I've only seen one case where that happens, where that happened. And it was actually because the machine was waiting for the press any key. But I haven't seen that occur on any of the modern machines. And it was just handled where someone walked over the machine and pressed the space bar and it kept booting back up. But yeah.
This one's interesting. With SecureWipe, is there a way to ensure the laptop has now become a brick?
Well, you do have the certificate of erasure.
Okay.
However, like I mentioned, the main use of SecureWipe is more for compliance, only because, yes, once you start the SecureWipe process, the machine has to be online. And in fact, let me take a step back. So, as I showed you, there is an agent that gets installed at the Windows level. That agent locally will then communicate with the local firmware on that machine. So the information does need to go from the portal to the local agent to start that SecureWipe when it reboots the machine. Now, if that process, like if you set it immediately and it reboots the machine and starts the SecureWipe process, then it's gonna, it's just gonna complete, unless they just smash up the laptop completely. But you will have that certificate of erasure that shows you that the wipe process has been done on that machine.
And if I understand the question correctly, I think essentially the answer is if the SecureWipe kicks off and goes through, the machine does in effect become a brick at that point, because there's no operating system on it. Now, obviously, if you have control, you can reload it and so forth. But if you're doing this for security purposes because someone stole the machine, then yeah, it's just totally wiped. The person's got essentially just a brick, and you maybe lost the machine, but you haven't lost the data.
Perfect. Can FirmGuard also protect the firmware in routers, firewalls, managed switches, etc.?
So right now it is PC based, and
yeah, so
I don't know how much I can talk about. So, but we are looking at devices, firmware on IoT devices. I'm not talking about like your fridge, but things like router switches, things like that. But currently, the FirmGuard product as it stands today is for PC BIOSes.
Yeah, right now it's Windows. It doesn't matter, server, laptop, what have you. But yeah, it's Windows based, and yeah, what that's Rob's getting at is we have a future vision for Linux and other things. Yeah.
Perfect. I think I've got just one more here, unless I missed something. So if I did, throw it back at the bottom and we'll make sure we answer it. But I always worry about flashing a BIOS chip for fear of an incident where the system gets bricked. What feature is provided to protect against the possible problem, especially when this is being done remotely?
Yeah. So, and again, that is something that, as I mentioned, it's always nerve-wracking even for me, when I'm doing my own PC, updating the BIOS. So, yeah, we do offer the feature. And it's more like, you know, we're letting you know that the BIOS is out of date. You can determine how you want to proceed from there. We do offer you the ability to, again, push off that update process. And from that point forward, it is, you know, the update goes locally on the machine, and it's, you know, being pushed directly on the machine itself. So even though the process starts remotely, once the actual capsule update arrives at the machine, everything is done locally. But I have spoken to customers that are like, I'm just not comfortable with it. And, you know, that's perfectly fine. Again, we're offering you the tool. And there is, like with anything, the possibility with, you know, when you're talking about a BIOS update, that there could be, you know, someone unplugged the machine or something like that. And there are things that you can't think of that might happen in that BIOS update. But as far as our involvement in it, and I'm not trying to, you know, push it aside, but I'm just letting you know that we didn't invent some new technique that will, you know, flash the BIOS for you. We are just getting the manufacturer who has years of, you know, working with their BIOSes and their machines, the remote ability to push that update out to the machine.
One more question came in. Only Windows-based, no Linux?
Currently Windows only, correct? Yes. Linux is in the roadmap.
Awesome. I don't think, I know you're looking in here. I don't think I missed any other ones.
Oh, yeah. So the push out update BIOS is not available right now, but will be in a week or two.
Oh, awesome. Perfect.
And I should I mentioned that, you know, that price that we talked about, when you become a customer like Dan did, when that new update comes along, there's no extra charge. He's just going to get it. So when that update feature comes out, you know, as Rob says, in a week or so, Dan and Aaron just get it.
And I did get a message from my sales team. That pricing would be $279 Canadian per endpoint.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Well, if we don't have any other questions, you know, we'll wrap up here. I know we had a special for the webinars that we were doing in November, that anybody that stayed on with us was able to be put in a raffle for $500. And Ari Gombold won this one. So Ari will be sending that out to you. Congratulations. But, you know, thank you guys, Amit. And team, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you guys. We really do enjoy working with companies like you guys that are doing some amazing things for the MSP community.
Absolutely, Tanya. Always a pleasure. And yeah, everybody, please sign up for the SecureCheck audit. You won't be disappointed.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
All right.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.